The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Our aim is to explore the fringe, lost civilizations, alternative science, the paranormal, and much more. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live or future guests via email or the live chat room. And remember to subscribe to us on iTunes. And now welcome to this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And welcome to this week's edition of the show. This week, we are going to have as our guests Dr. John Ward and Scotty Roberts, who were supposed to be on last week. But last week, things didn't quite go right. Scotty was sick, and John had the wrong time, as he's in Sweden, and Scotty apparently gave him the wrong, was a 1 hour off on what time the interview was supposed to be. So I instead played the Edmund marriage interview, which was scheduled for this week, last week. And this last Thursday, I interviewed John and Scotty at the right time, with Scotty not being sick. And this was the interview that really should have aired last week. But it doesn't really matter, I guess, which week it was. It was a good interview. It was a fun interview. And we talk about a whole bunch of different stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. And remember, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can find the links to everything we do. Tons of new stuff on the YouTube, and more to come. So here's the interview with Scotty and John. All right, so tonight we welcome to the show Dr. John Ward and Scotty Roberts again. The last time we talked to you, you guys were in Egypt.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
God, and now you're...
It was about a lifetime ago, wasn't it?
It feels like it.
And now you're half a world apart.
Yes, we are.
We are indeed.
I'm over here in the cornfields of Wisconsin, with
really is in his garage, actually.
Autumn creeping in, and it's very nice. The leaves are starting to turn. It's all orangey and reds and yellows. And John, you're not in the desert today, though.
I'm not in the desert. I'm in the palatial gardens of my cabin, and in Sweden.
Sweden. Yeah.
I'm surrounded by Smurfs and so forth. It's very nice.
Well, it's Smurfs, yeah. But in a couple of weeks, you'll both be at the Paradigm Symposium.
Yes, we will.
Indeed.
And
tell people a little bit about where that is and what it is.
Sure will. The Paradigm Symposium, this is our third year. We launched this as kind of the event or public speaking presentation branch of INTREPID magazine. I publish INTREPID magazine. John is the managing editor of INTREPID magazine. We are in our third year, soon to be starting our fourth year in a couple of months. And a few years ago, it was actually Micah Hanks I was working with when we got the Paradigm Symposium up and running in 2012. And we started off our first year with most of the cast of Ancient Aliens, and had a few metaphysical speakers in the mix there. And last year we moved more to the alternative theories in history and archaeology with Robert Bauval, Dr. Robert Schock, and guests like that for last year. And then this year we have kind of blended those, and people have tried to plug exactly what we do with Paradigm Symposium. And I tell them, if you look at INTREPID magazine, you get a pretty good idea of what Paradigm Symposium is all about. And that is, we have kind of a, John, you know what
Yes.
our mission statement is, really. It's really in a phrase. We have said that we are trying to bridge the gap between, and that's in short, bridging the gap. And the whole idea here is bridging the gap between academia and alternative theory. And we like to give platform to all different kinds of theories, all different kinds of modes of thinking, whether it be in the alternative sciences, alternative archaeology, alternative history, but as it blends with real elements of both of the by real, I mean
And
academic, established.
and that is actually the beauty of the paradigm is that it does provide that platform for the, and we always use this word, the alternative community. And, and I'd love to get rid of all of these. I said this last year at Paradigm. I'd love to get rid of all these labels, because it's these labels that add to the bricks that build this wall between the kind of alternative community and academia. And it's kind of funny, because most of the topics that we discuss and we debate at the Paradigm, like ufology, telekinesis, paranormal, supernatural, aliens, all of that, cattle mutilations. That was a fascinating subject last year. I actually thoroughly enjoyed that one. But all of those subjects, they actually fall not really within the alternative community. They actually do fall within mainstream science, and we seem to forget this. And I gave a brief lecture last week at the British Society of Dowsers in England, and the topic of my conversation was just previous dowsing experiences. But I drew upon the Paradigm Symposium within the lecture, and I was basically making the analogy that if we were to turn the clocks back by 100 years, we had the likes of the Society for Psychical Research. We had the Ghost Club, we had the Royal Society, and we had this huge wave of Western mysticism and spiritualism that was sweeping across Victorian Europe at the time. But with that came the sciences, and the sciences were behind these guys because they were trying to make sense of it. At the time, you've got to remember that it was kind of a new age for them. Now, today, we use the terminology of New Age to personify a new type of spiritualism. But it's not something that can be quantified really within the sciences. And the sciences have kind of backed away from the paranormal, the spiritualism, the occult, all of those bits and pieces that go into that huge melting pot that we call today the alternative community. And I think it's a shame, because we're losing out on so much science and so much, I use this word now, credibility that could be associated with these different genres. And I think that's part and parcel of what the Paradigm Symposium does. It tries to instill this credibility back into the system. And so we have these great speakers that are up on stage, and we've got a wonderful audience listening to them. And it is a wonderful platform to come and listen, and not just listen to them throughout their presentation and lecture, but afterwards, because that's one of the other beauties about the Paradigm, is that all of our speakers basically stay around. It's not just a case of turn up, give their lecture, and then go home. No, they stay with us, and they're with us in the hotel lobby, they're in the bar, and most of the actual action takes place after the event, once we've closed it in the evening, and we all go back to the hotel and the bar becomes another Paradigm Symposium of all of its own. And that it's amazing, an amazing atmosphere.
I
if you
think
haven't been, you've definitely got to go.
That's what I loved about the Paradigm Symposium so far, is that, for us, this isn't just another event worth slapping out there and trying to compete with other events. There's a lot of passion behind this, and there's a lot of heart put into what we want to do and why we're doing what we're doing. And when we have people come here, we try to put that forward to everybody, is that this is part of something special. You're here involved with something special, not because we're putting it on, but because of all the people that are there together at that time. And you could say one of the biggest, if you will, one of the biggest metaphysical elements of the Paradigm Symposium is the symposium itself. It's really the people that are coming together and learning and listening and experiencing and making that experience even broader amongst each other when they're away from the auditorium. And so you'll find that you'd be hard pressed to find too many people who've attended the Paradigm Symposium that from in the past that would say, "Oh, I didn't get anything out of that. Nothing new." Some of the speakers people have heard before. Some of the topics are not necessarily brand new topics, never before broached by anybody, but they are expansions on those, expansions on The people that you're seeing, what they're presenting, it's expansion of their work. And then the real spirit of the thing is, like John just said, it's the rubbing shoulders, the brushing shoulder, the sitting down in the lobby. You see groups of people all over in the bar after hours and things like that, of people just hanging out together. And so that is the big spirit, I think, of the Paradigm Symposium.
I think that too, when John was just talking there, he throws out the word New Age, he throws out the word occult, and immediately I think people jump to conclusions
Yeah.
as to what those things mean that are not accurate.
Very true. When you talk about the occult, many people, the first thing that comes to their minds is like, you're teaching Satanism?
Satan.
It must be Satan.
Satan.
Satan, follow me, follow me.
Receive this sacrifice I offer to thee.
Whip crock went his whoopee tail.
Whoopee tail.
Follow me. Be you angels? Nay, we are but men. And so,
Rock.
rock. Na, na. I don't know if you know the song we're referencing. That's actually the opening song to Intrepid Radio. So, Tenacious D. We must give him credit where credit is due. And but the whole idea with that is people look at the occult, for example, and that's the association they make without understanding what occultism really is. It has nothing to do with Satan worshipers. It's ancient mysticism. It's ancient knowledge. It's seeking out ancient answers. So we entertain the occult in that respect.
And if I'm not mistaken, the word itself just means hidden.
It does. That's all it means.
That's what it means: hidden knowledge, hidden gnosis, and to a greater extent, it typifies the Paradigm Symposium, because that's what it's about: knowledge and wisdom, passing on of information. And you've probably heard me say this many times before, Sarah. I know Scotty has, but I always use this as an analogy, and that is that if we stop talking to one another, if we stop listening, if we stop debating, we stop discussing, we stop learning. And it's so important, especially in this day and age. And we've covered this subject quite a few times lately, because it's coming to the fore. It really is. It typifies exactly where we are right now, and that is that we've kind of entered a technological age where we take everything for granted, and because it's at the tap of our finger on a screen. We can be sitting on a beach and we could be watching some program on Dr. John Dee, for instance, on our little mobile Android on YouTube, and we feel that we've instilled within us all the information and all the wisdom and all the gnosis of Dr. John Dee, because we've watched a documentary filmed by some Tin Pot production company who have sold you a bill of goods, which is basically nothing to do with Dr. John Dee. It's just how they interpret the information and what sells best on television and what looks good on television. Not exactly the actual information or the acts of the man or what he contributed towards science, but actually what looks good. So it's about the arithmetical bits and pieces. It's about the scrying with mirrors. It's about his magical powers to turn base metal into gold, and how that was his undoing with Queen Elizabeth I, and ultimately the demise of his partner, Edward Kelly, who fell to his death eventually. Well, he broke his leg and then died afterwards. But it's all these kind of things that we kind of get through information, through dissemination, through our laptops, our phones, our Androids, and so forth, and the internet. And we've lost the ability to actually communicate on a level where we actually are in person. And Scotty made an amazing graphic the other day and posted it up as one of our advertisements for the Paradigm Symposium. And we were discussing this very subject. And I said, try and picture a couch potato, because that's what we've produced. And we to a certain degree, Sarai, have a responsibility here, as people who are in the kind of the public domain, like yourself and your show and our show and what we're doing. And we have this responsibility to draw people together, to inspire them and motivate them to come out and discuss it face to face. Bring back this sense of community, because we've lost that. It's all very singular and, dare I say, selfish in a way, because we've become so closeted within our own little bubbles and environments but those environments follow us everywhere we go now. So we don't feel as if we need to be part of a larger community or be part of something where there are actually living people. We can do all that from the safety of our armchair at home while drinking a cup of coffee and basically experiencing what we think and perceive is an experience, but actually it's not. It's a misrepresentation. That's what it is.
I would
I
agree
think
with that.
yeah, so would I. And I also think too that like anything, there's pros and cons to the internet. The internet lets you have all this amazing information at the touch of a finger. You can do so much with it, but so much of that information isn't vetted. And you don't,
True.
and people will read something and just be like, "Oh, well, I read it on the internet, and so this is what I now believe because they sounded really convincing."
Right.
Yeah, and that's fine to a point, but you see, this is where the Paradigm Symposium comes in. It allows you to come and join in and listen to these people. And another one of Scotty's wonderful, and I'm not that I'm blowing smoke anywhere with Scotty at the moment, but he came up with this other one, to sit at the feet of Socrates. If you put yourself back in ancient Alexandria, would you have basically turned around and said, "Oh no, I'm not going to go and listen to Socrates there. I'll catch it on the podcast"? You wouldn't do it. You'd actually be there. You'd be there in the amphitheater, and you'd be listening to him intently. And yet we've lost this ability somehow. Somehow we feel as if we can get everything we can out of second-hand knowledge instead of first-hand knowledge. And to be honest with you, at this present moment, there's possibly only really a handful of researchers out there. And when I use that as a sweeping statement, that are actually in the field. They're actually out there doing it. And then they're bringing that information to the public, and by way of books, magazine articles, papers, periodicals, and so forth. And we kind of, oh, that's nice. Oh, wow. And we see them on their social networks, and we go onto their postings, and we say, oh, we wish we could join you, and so forth. And oh, thank you for doing so much within the community. You bring so much light and energy to it, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. And then when it comes down to actually going and seeing these guys, there's a kind of lethargy. It's lethargic to a certain point. It's a case of, oh, well, oh, no, I got to spend some money, and oh, no, I don't know if I got time. I'm going to be pruning my ingrowing toenail on that day or something of that nature. We've become so comfortable. I think sometimes we've got to have a bit of a jolt to the system, like an electric shock, to get us going again. But thankfully, with the Paradigm Symposium, when we do get together, it's one hell of a party. Apart from the guests and the lectures and the presentations and the vendors that we have there selling their wares, this year we've got the Mysteries Room with Joseph Amaro from Magus Books, and he's put together this, what we call the Mysteries Room, and it's going to be dealing with all the secret societies from people who are in the know, and they're going to be there on hand to answer your questions on things like the Theosophical Society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Thelema religion by Aleister Crowley, the Masons. And then you've got all of his books and paraphernalia that Joseph will be bringing with him. And so you've got that aspect of the Paradigm Symposium, which is an entity within the Paradigm Symposium, but it's kind of separate from the speakers. And then you've got all the speakers during the day. And then apart from that, we've got the panel discussions. We've got the live reading in one of the evenings. We've got the ghost hunt with David Weatherly and Barry Fitzgerald. There's so much going on at this Paradigm Symposium this year that it's going to be phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
And when you throw out Crowley, that's another one that immediately people start throwing around all this misinformation about who Crowley was.
Oh, don't get me on that one. I've spent the last 5 months on one paper alone, dealing with one particular spell that Crowley used, and it's driving me crazy, this paper. But he was, I thought I knew him before, and I'd done some research on him over the years, but the last 5 months I've really honed him down. I've basically read every single book that's ever been written on the man and looked for all of his work and followed him meticulously on his journey, his spiritual journey, because that's what it was.
Oh,
And
yeah.
no, there is no doubt, not a shadow of a doubt, in fact, he was a genius in his own right within that religious kind of connotational context. The guy really knew his history when it comes to Gnostic mass, when it comes to ancient religions, when it comes to even the New Age religion, remember that word there, of the Western mysticism that was sweeping Victorian and Edwardian Britain. He really cottoned onto it. He knew exactly where we were. We were emerging out of the industrial age. We were entering a time of turbulence with the Boer Wars down in South Africa and the beginning of the First World War in Europe. He had latched onto that. He'd latched onto the psyche of the people, especially in Britain, and he developed a religion based on all of these ancient texts and New Age texts, and amalgamated them to bring forward something that was pretty way before his time. I think if he was to be around now, he would make Scientology look stupid. That's
Well,
that is for sure, because he would have so many followers, it would be unbelievable.
And he seemed to have a little unintentional influence on Scientology as well.
Well, he was actually good friends with Lovecraft, very good friends. As there is contentions there, though, whether he was as deeply ingrained within the friendship as it's made out to be. But there were definitely a relationship there with Lovecraft.
Lovecraft.
Yeah.
H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes. Because Lovecraft,
Okay.
if you look into your Scientology, there's a crossover there between Lovecraft and the rest of the guys, and out of that came Scientology. You really got to go right back into the basics of it all, but he was instrumental.
See, I didn't think they actually knew each other.
Yes, they did. There was correspondence. There
interesting.
was correspondence between them.
That's really interesting. And I know, but he also had the connection with Parsons and the guy who actually wrote Dianetics there that became Scientology.
That's correct.
Parsons,
Parsons was much more of a closer friend to Crowley than Lovecraft was.
Yeah, well, yeah. But I mean, his influence has just been so far-ranging, and people just dismiss him as this crazy Satanist. I heard someone recently say he was all about murder and mayhem.
Well, it's ridiculous. The Satanist part comes from a depiction of Baphomet, the horned god, which is a depiction of a goat, half human, sitting on his throne, which is with the pentagram behind him, which is the quintessential image these days of Satan worship and so forth. And
sure.
But if you look at the actual context of that picture, that was actually devised by Eliphas Levi back in the mid 19th century. And if you look at the actual components and the aspects of that iconography, again, it draws heavily upon the ancient religions. And we're not talking about occults and so forth, but ancient religions that we today is part and parcel of our mainstream religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They are all part and parcel of these ancient religions. And Baphomet is merely a mixture of all of those coming out of the Gnostics, who were prior to the Christians, who again were kind of trying to bring essences out of the ancient religion, especially of Egypt at the time. And Baphomet is merely just a mixture of those different gods of the time, going to Banabirjet, Khonsu, Ptah, Hathor, Isis, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And this is what you end up with, this iconography that's now been instilled within our society, but which has other connotations purely because of its misrepresentation by different groups.
Oh, sure. I mean, and the thing is, anytime you get that misrepresentation, I mean, like the swastika was not a negative symbol before the Nazis took it.
Well, we just had a big article in Intrepid magazine from now his name has slipped my mind. He's got a book coming out with the Inner Traditions on ancient sacred symbols, and we did an article on the swastika, and we actually had somebody criticize that article out there that we're in support of occultic neo-Nazism and stuff like that. But
Wasn't Laird Scranton that wrote it?
no,
Was
no, it wasn't Laird Scranton. He's got a new book out. He's
Yeah.
actually going to be on our show, Intrepid Radio, this coming Sunday night, talking about his new book
Go on.
on Chinese linguistics and how it compares to, cosmologically or whatever to other. Why did I say or whatever? You know what I'm talking about. I just said that like, cosmology, whatever. I talked to, like, my neighbor Jim comes over and he's an Iraqi war vet, and it doesn't get into cosmology element. You go, Jim, it's kind of a cosmological thing, that kind of stuff, junk. But you know what I'm talking about. And but no, it's Ian. It'll come to me. It'll come to me through the course of the evening here. But
Right.
Did you know that the British soldiers in the trenches in World War One carried swastikas with them?
Really?
Yeah, they were. In fact, there's a wonderful advert which you could Google this, guys. You couch potatoes out there, you can Google this and get an actual picture of this. I think it was the Telegraph or the Times ran adverts during the build-up to World War One and during the first years of the First World War, where you could buy Lucky Charms from earrings
They're magically
to
delicious.
rings, which were all swastikas.
Wow.
For the British Army.
See,
it was, and the Swedish Air Force was using the swastika as their emblem right up until 1950, 1960 odd.
really?
Still, they've always had the swastika as their emblem. The American Air Force, you've got the kind of the star that personifies the American Air Force. The British is the two circles with the red and green and so forth. The Swedish was the swastika.
By the way, this book is called The Book of Primal Signs by Nigel Pennick.
Ah, okay.
And Nigel
And we've
Pennick.
actually.
Go ahead.
It was a good. No, I was going to say it was a great article. I read it enthusiastically. It was a wonderful article. Do you remember me showing you the swastika we had? We've got the number of them actually. We've got about, I think it's about 150 swastikas at Gebel Silsila, our site in Egypt, inscribed into the walls of the quarry faces. So you're talking about a symbol that has been around for eons, and because of it's difficult how to say this. Is it a mistake that he used it? Was it its association? By association, is that its negativity? Or do we, and again, just for discussion's sake here, with regards to symbolism, was the symbol of the swastika itself instrumental? And try and bear with me on this one. Was the swastika itself used by the Nazi Party? Was it actually instrumental as a motivation for the people of Germany at the time, in conjunction with the other attributes of Hitler and the rest of the Nazi Party and their propaganda machine, which was fantastic, by the way. We can't take that away. And the fact that they were coming out of this Great Depression that had been caused by the rest of Europe after them losing basically the First World War. They were crippled economically, and basically as they approached towards the 30s, Hitler and the rest of the guys were instrumental in bringing back a sense of pride, a sense of self-worth amongst the German population. And the swastika was used as an emblem to personify that. And yet when you look at the swastika, it has this most powerful, and it is powerful, I dare anyone to say it's not. It has this powerful draw about it, whether that be the Nazi swastika on its side, turned in the opposite direction, or the Tibetan swastika, which is the emblem of good luck and good fortune, and is placed absolutely everywhere in Asia, even today. Or was it a sign of good luck for those guys in the trenches when the whistle blew and they had to get over the top and the machine gun fire was coming over, whistling over their heads, and they felt that that little swastika emblem was going to bring them good luck and save them from the German bullet? Or was it the Swedish Air Force? And so forth. Or the hockey team in New York with all their jerseys with the swastika on, because that was their emblem as well. You've got to start looking at symbolism, and we've got to try to get away from, again, negative connotations, similar to Crowley and what we were discussing before, and look at the essences behind symbols. I'm writing a paper at the moment, which is on a lecture I'm going to be giving next year. And it will be dealing directly with symbols, and the way in which we as a society basically thrive and operate as a society. We are actually kind of gelled together by the use of symbols. Whether we believe in that or not, it's just part and parcel of our life, because we are surrounded by them. And the symbol isn't necessarily just a geometric pattern or something that is a recognizable image. It can also be personified as a person. It can be personified as something that's natural, that is a symbol of, etc., etc., etc. And so we've got to look at the deeper essences and the deeper meanings behind symbols. My opening line on one of these papers was, ever since Paleolithic man blew red ochre and black charcoal pigment across his hands on the cave walls, we have been surrounded by symbols that have express and try to communicate a message of intent to our fellow man, whether that be for good or whether that be for bad. And it fascinates me. I mean, that's my research, because that's what I do at Silsila, as Scotty knows, and many of your listeners will know. We're cataloging all of the inscriptions there and all of the symbols, which they're in their thousands at Gebel Silsila, inscribed and scratched on the walls of the quarries.
I was just amazed when I was there, just walking through all these quarries. That site, John, what is that, about 20 kilometers square or something like that? A huge archaeological site spanning both sides of the Nile. And we spent days just walking through the site. So you're walking, roughly the equivalent of somewhere around, 15 to 20 miles. We're walking, trekking back and forth through this place over the course of a couple of different days, and looking at symbols from 17,000 years ago all the way up to Greco-Roman times, and all through dynastic Egypt, pre-dynastic Egypt, Paleolithic man, and some of these sites are still standing there on a hilltop untouched, and little outcroppings of rock that were obviously had poles shoved in them at one time to put a skin over the top for a roof, and a campfire outside, and flint shards around that date back. John, how far back does that site go?
You actually had a good time there, didn't you, Scott?
It was unbelievable.
You're reminiscing. You're reminiscing. We're back on site in just under, I think it's just over a month, isn't it? 15th of November we start, and we'll be out there for another month and a half. Yeah, in the deserts, the baking deserts of Silsila.
I remember.
Can't wait to get back.
There was one place where John just said to me, he says, as you walk through and you couldn't tell from looking at it, the untrained eye would walk by and say, this is all just rocky terrain we're walking through. And John said, now look very closely. He says, there's a village here. And we would just walk through, and he'd say, now be very careful where you walk. Look under your feet, and pottery shards everywhere. Some of it dating back into, I don't know how much I can say about periods and things like that, but unbelievable bits of pottery just spread all over the ground, almost as far as your eye could see. And just unbelievable things. And the symbolism, as he was talking about on the walls, was unreal. And things where if you cleared a little sand away in a corridor going between the the centuries of strata of removed stone in this quarry. It would build a corridor, and you start moving the sand away from the wall at the base, which is the latest, and you're finding inscriptions and hieroglyphs down even below the sand level, and it was just unbelievable. And then all the way up 70 feet up on a wall, there's inscription, because that was once the ground level. And so it was just an amazing place. And John, you guys refer to this, you and Maria refer to that as Gebel Silsila is probably Egypt's oldest, largest temple site.
It by far it is it is on record as the oldest sandstone quarries in ancient Egypt, but the site itself, up until recently, was considered just that, just a quarry. Where all the stone was extracted to build the likes of Karnak, Luxor Temple, the Ramesseum, Philae, Elephantine, and so forth. But over our past seasons, we've been able to push the boundaries of that. And now we're looking at a place that has been a place of habitation, a place of refuge, a place that has provided shelter and safety and sustainability as far as water and food, sustenance from the fish and so forth that dwell within the Nile. For man, since he crawled out of the vast Western Sahara desert, but remember, when he crawled out of that, it was lush and green. It was a forest, and it was dying because of the climate change, and it was started to become very arid. There was no longer the rainfall, and so the forests were dying and the lush greenness was drying up. And so he migrated towards the banks of the Nile, where he could sustain his living and sustain his tribe. And so Silsila took on this whole new kind of awakening kind of thing, because also the beautiful thing about Silsila is that it was an island. You know, with the inundation, the flooding of the Nile each year, the Nile would actually literally circumnavigate Silsila and reduce it to an island within this great sea of water that spread right across the east bank and west banks of the Nile itself. And you know, you look at some of the old black and white photographs of the pyramids of Egypt, so you'll get an idea. In the Sphinx, you'll see the water lapping the sides of the Giza Plateau. That's because the Nile flooded literally everywhere before the manufacture of the dams by the British in the mid-19th century, and then the new dam that was built in 1971 by the Egyptian government and Russians. Before all of that took place, the Nile literally flooded the land, and people had to migrate from their homes where they were living closer to the Nile back out into the desert areas to refuge from the floodwaters, and then they would migrate back again and turn the black soil into fertile agricultural ground. And so they'd get their crops in and they'd harvest before the next flood came the next year, and so forth. And this was a cycle that has continued for thousands of years. And we've got to remember that, you know, thousands of years man has had this cycle in Egypt, and it's something that we overlook sometimes.
Okay. And why has this site never been looked at prior to now?
It has been explored by previous scholars. You can go all the way right back until Napoleon's men. We've got some wonderful graffiti there, actually, of Napoleon's engineers when they turned up on site. But it's not a vastness of temples. So there's no gold there. There's no treasure. And unfortunately, you know, Egyptology as a science is relatively new. It's only been around for really the past 200 to 300 years maximum. Before that, it was more of a treasure hunting time. And over the years, especially during the 18th and 19th and early part of the 20th century, and I mean the early part of the 20th century, Egypt was really more of a huge open-air antiques market where scholars and aristocracy from Europe and beyond would come to Egypt and basically purchase her antiquity and take it away from there. It wasn't until we had the likes of Flinders Petrie, Pitt Rivers, Budge, Batterscombe Gunn, for instance, Howard Carter, Margaret Murray, and all the rest of the guys that would come, and they would catalogue meticulously what was left. And through careful excavation, through careful research, careful documentation, we began to preserve Egypt's glorious past. And that really has continued up until today. But as far as Silsila is concerned, it's one of those sites that kind of was neglected in that huge research program. One guy who was very instrumental there, of course, was the late Caminos, an Argentinian Egyptologist, who did an amazing job. So the records dictate he spent 30 years there by all accounts. But unfortunately, he didn't spend entirely 30 years. He was on site, off site, into the Sudan, in other places of Egypt. But unfortunately, he died prior to actually publishing a lot of his work. And so a lot of his work has been lost. We still have the records within the EES, and which we'll be working from ourselves as well. But he managed to publish a beautiful volume on all of the cenotaphs. They're basically mock tombs, complete with burial chambers, and depictions of the Book of the Dead and the offerings and so forth. But nobody was buried in them. And on the west bank of Silsila, we have literally just over 100 of these cenotaphs preserved, and Caminos was able to publish that. Preisinger and so forth, they published some of the works of the inscriptions, especially the Demotic and the hieratic inscriptions that we've got at Silsila, which we have in the thousands. Just to give you an idea, one of the quarries, which is just one of several hundred, we've got just over 1,500 symbols alone that have been etched into the sandstone.
Wow.
It's an amazing site. It really is. Thankfully, over the next coming years, we'll be publishing more and more material on it and be able to bring that to the general public's awareness. We're hoping to bring out a kind of coffee table book for the general public during 2015 with the help of Mr. Roberts. Hopefully the ministry, the Ministry of Antiquity plus the Ministry of Transport and Tourism in Egypt, only this month came out with a wonderful statement that they're going to be investigating the possibility of putting a landing jetty on the east bank of Silsila to allow the cruise boats to stop, which will enhance tourism and allow the tourists to once and for all to visit Silsila, because that's one of the major drawbacks with Silsila. That's possibly also why it's so well preserved and hasn't also been documented as well as other sites, is because it's very difficult to get to. You can only get to Silsila by the Nile. Trying to get it to by road is near enough impossible. It's very, very cut off from other communities.
Oh, even by road, when we took the main, quote unquote, the main road in to Silsila, you can veer off on the dirt path, or you can walk it, and it's about a half a mile thereabouts, maybe even a mile, to get down to the Speas of Horemheb, which is really one of the big, I guess, most identifying sites when you pass by on the Nile River, is the big Speas of Horemheb, who was the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. And it's sitting right there, and they've got steps built up from the riverbank and so on, and you can go up and look at it. One thing that was amazing to me when we went from West Bank to East Bank, which the East Bank is closed off to public access, we just got off on the rocks, pulled the boat, bumped right up against the rocks, tied it off on a rock, and hopped off onto the shore. And I remember John, the first time, leading me into the quarries there. And you go through this corridor. It's maybe 12 or 15 feet wide. And on either side of you, for about a half of a mile, I think it is, a quarter to a half of a mile, it's hard to gauge it. Think of it maybe at least the length of a football field. Okay, that's not a half mile. Think that length, but on either side of you, rising up the equivalent of maybe 50 stories, is just sheer rock face that's all been quarried out in this corridor that they used to haul the stone out over the centuries, and it kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, of course. And you walk through that, and then you emerge into the larger one of the quarries, and again, it's like 50-story buildings all around you in a big open desert floor. that's all flattened out and again strewn with pottery. And I think what I know we're spending a lot of time talking about Silsila, but what I was impressed with there was you think quarry and you go, oh, quarry, chisels, and whatever. And, and that it might not seem exciting to somebody right off the top, but you walk through there and it is really a microcosm of all aspects of humanity that lived there for thousands of years and worked there, from daily dishes and tools down to sacramental objects, down to sphinxes, down to obelisks, down to stone, mason marks, supervisors, inscriptions on walls, pharaonic inscription. It was an unbelievable place. And when we were on the West Bank, I remember it looks like the West Bank, you just walk off the Nile and you're really walking into the Sahara Desert. And but as we go further back in there off the Nile, we were up on the top, and it looked like a domed, very rounded, domed, flat cobblestone feature. It was all it seemed to be for as far as the eye could see. And you'd look down at all these little stones under your feet. And this was just from the Nile, I think, and the rains and the sandstorms over thousands of years, just compressing this all down to, it felt like you were walking across cobblestone. And when you'd look down, you'd find fossils, you would find inscriptions, you would find flint, you would find tools, all these things that have been there. It's like whoever dropped this piece of worked flint dropped it here thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years ago. And it's sitting next to a fossil of a leaf.
I was going to say, were you
rock.
there when we found all those
Yes.
leaf fossils?
Yes.
And they were absolutely fantastic. You can see in the strata where they're coming out of, and where the rain has then distributed them down this wadi, which is the Arabic word for valley. And in this wadi, it was just strewn with all these leaves, but these leaves were stone because they're basically fossilized. And it's absolutely amazing, the stratigraphy and the geology of this area.
Oh, and down
yes.
to, remember, just I was so impressed when we walked, actually hit the tarmac road on the north side, if I've got my directions right, on the north end, and then we go beyond that, and you start seeing curbs from a road, and it stretches for miles. And all which you wouldn't see if you were just driving by or walking through on your casual walk through the desert, you wouldn't normally notice this. And so it was just, and we found piled stones, things like that, old markers that just haven't changed in thousands of years, and man piles for markers and things like that. So it was unbelievable. It was really something.
All right.
See, this is the essence of Paradigm Symposium, Soraya.
It really is.
This what we're talking about now. I know we're not seeing each other. I know we're doing this over the internet, and we're here on a wonderful radio show. But the Paradigm Symposium, this is what it personifies: is being able to share this knowledge, but face to face, seeing the body language, seeing the expression on Scotty's face as a person who's been there as a visitor, and he's been able to capture the essence of a site like that. And it's still, even today, still infuses Scotty when he talks about it.
Certainly does.
But to see his body language is something else. To see the smile on his face when he's talking about this, and his actions and his arms flying up in the air and so forth. That's what Paradigm Symposium is all about.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with John Ward and Scotty Roberts.
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live guests via email or the live chat room. You can also check out our upcoming schedule, blog, links section, book reviews, videos, and links to our Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, and much more. That's wheredidtheroadgo.com.
And we're talking tonight with Dr. John Ward and Scotty Roberts. And when is the Paradigm Symposium?
Paradigm Symposium is 2 weeks from today. As a matter of fact, Thursday, It is 2 weeks from today, Thursday the 2nd of October through Sunday the 5th of October. And
this will be airing on Saturday, so it'll still
All
2
right.
weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks from the day this airs, we'll be in the thick of it. And I should give you a quick rundown on the people that are going to be there.
Yes, please do.
This is in alphabetical order so as to avoid being too egalitarianistic. Is that a word? So in alphabetical order, we have Robert Bauval, and everybody knows him, author, researcher, Egyptologist. We've got Andrew Collins, who just recently wrote probably one of the most definitive books on Göbekli Tepe,
Indeed.
and an amazing man. And we've got Eric von Daniken, who wrote, everybody knows him. He's kind of an icon in the ancient astronaut. He actually began the ancient astronaut theory in a big pop cultural way with his book, The Chariots of the Gods, back in '68. And he's written 34 books, I think, since then. We've got Richard Dolan, who is an author and researcher. He's a ufologist, is where he primarily gets a lot of his attention. We've got Barry Fitzgerald, who is, people know him from Ghost Hunters International, that television show. Irish-born Barry Fitzgerald, but he's also an author, researcher, historian, and many other mysteries other than just paranormal. He is also, by the way, going to be leading. We thought we'd tap into him, no pun intended there, and have him do a paranormal investigation of the old site that we're holding the event at, the Women's Club of Minneapolis. 110-year-old site that's built on actually the ground that used to be the old Lakota Native American village in the outskirts of Minneapolis back over 100 years ago.
Wow.
We've got Larry Flaxman, Marie D. Jones. They are authors. Now, they're the only ones so far that we've heard may not be able to be here this year due to some circumstances on their end. We've got Thomas Fusco. He's an author and a researcher, kind of puts forward this theory of everything. He's a scientific thinker, philosopher. We've got the very renowned Graham Hancock, who will be here, and everybody knows about Graham's work. And I think, John, you've expressed it. He was one of the guys that first kind of led you into thinking some of the things, pursuing some of the things you've pursued.
He was indeed. Can't wait to meet him.
We've got Micah Hanks, the esteemed Micah Hanks from the Graylian Report and the Micah Hanks program, and he's a prolific author. You've seen his work. We've got Chase Kletsky, and she is coming to us. We originally were going to have her come with a couple of other very big personalities who could not make it this year. L.A. Marzulli, Brian Forrester. They were going to be talking about the elongated skulls, the Paracas skulls. So we think she's going to be talking about her research there. And or on MUFON. She's also been big in MUFON. We've got Dan Madsen, a big friend of ours who started out publishing the Star Trek official fan club newsletter in the late 1970s.
Nice.
Went on to get the first Paramount license to start publishing the Star Trek Communicator magazine. Then he went into all the Lucasfilms magazines, Star Wars magazines, Indiana Jones magazines. He ended up doing the Lord of the Rings magazines before he sold that company, and he's now with Her Universe. He's speaking on his experiences. He took his interest in all these things into just a slightly different direction than the rest of us. We've got Nick Redfern, the prolific author. Nick Redfern, conspiracy theories and so on. We've got Laird Scranton, who we've already talked about. We've got David Weatherly. He's a shaman, an author, researcher. We've got, as our keynote speaker, John Anthony West, who is an octogenarian that has been, is probably one of the most esteemed men in this field. He calls himself an author, historian, rogue Egyptologist, and Pythagorean, and official troublemaker. He likes to call himself. And if you ever have him on your radio show, he likes to have a vodka on the rocks while he's doing radio. And then, of course, John and yours truly will be there. And we've got Jim Harold from the Paranormal Podcast, who is going to be moderating our panel discussions. And
Nice.
then we also have some extras. We've got the Mysteries Room. You talking about hermetics and occultism and so on. We've got Joseph Amara, who owns Magus Books here in Minneapolis, an international bookstore, herbs and things that they do through their efforts there, and he's presenting this focused talk of with panel discussions and workshops right there in his own little room, which will be running through the whole symposium. We've got Allison James, who is a psychic who's going to be doing a gallery reading one of the evenings, and also what was that third thing that we had? Oh well, I already mentioned the paranormal investigation with Barry. So those are some of the extras we have going on. So it's going to be a packed weekend, and it's going to be at a lovely location, and that is 2 weeks from, by the time this airs, 2 weeks from 2 days ago. So 2 weeks from now, you can go to paradigmsymposium.com and get your tickets.
All right, awesome. Now let me ask you guys this, because I want to see where you stand on these things. So when it comes to ancient researchers, alternative theories, and stuff like that, it seems like there's a few different groups. The more mainstream group just go by the mainstream theory. You have the ancient aliens, ancient astronaut people like Zecharia Sitchin and such. You have the ancient civilization people like Graham Hancock, Robert Schoch, and such. And then you have like the people like Stephen Myers and Christopher Jordan, who think that maybe these ancient cultures were just a little more advanced than we give them credit for. In all of that, where do you guys stand?
I think John and I, while we have been recognized as a duo and joined at the hip, we do have different thoughts on certain things, but there are places where I think overall John and I align very well, and places where we've got our own interesting theories. That I would think there are some things that I think where John goes, "Oh, please, brother," and I don't have that so much with John, because John's more on that academic side of things, and so I tend to go, "Wow, yeah, I have to agree with that," although I may disagree with him on who Moses was, which is the topic of our last book. Oh,
please.
Oh, please, he says. And I would say this about John and I. If you look at us together, we are both academics. Maybe John even more so than I am. He's more the scholar and the academic. I am academic in the sense that I want to keep my research clean. I want to keep it as pure as I possibly can. I don't want to taint it with saying, well, I feel, or I think, or I believe. Those are things that tend to, that I think drive people off into the, it's so easy to step off into the woo edge of things by saying, well, I feel that universe is telling me. Not to mock that, but that's as much as saying, well, God told me to preach this to you.
Sure.
So there's an element of that we want to be, that we're a little afraid to not get into. So together, I think John and I try to represent common sense thinking with an academic edge to it, with the ability to say, even though we want to have the facts, ma'am, we are open to theory. We're open to even to notion, as long as that notion is not spurious, is not, as we might say, pulled out of your ass.
It's got to be based on fact.
Right.
I mean, that's the be end and end all. You can't base a theory or a hypothesis on some channeled mystical whim.
Oh, sure.
You've got to base it on fact. And one of the other things about the ancient alien or the ancient civilization theories that are out there is that a lot of it's based on hearsay. There's no fact behind it. And as much as I agree with what Scotty said completely, one of the other things that we try not to do, and that is we don't dismiss anybody.
Right.
And I think that's one of our redeeming factors, is that we don't dismiss anything that comes across our path.
Now, let me qualify that. We might, after considering somebody's theory, dismiss it. And I'm only saying that by saying there are private conversations John and I after having interviewed somebody, sometimes we go, wow, that guy was about as nutty as they come. You know, and you can usually tell those, the listener or the experiencer can usually tell when you're listening to somebody who's got a solid theory versus somebody, you know, who believes he's governed by the ghosts of Atlantis. And
Right.
you know, and again, we can't even dismiss that because we don't know for sure, but we try to
You
keep
can't
it,
prove it.
try to keep
No,
it
you
real.
can't. You can't prove otherwise.
And so I view, and I'm sorry I did interrupt your thought there, John. If you had more to that, please continue with that. But
No, you carry on, brother. You
I,
carry on.
I was just going to say, I see John and I as kind of, we see ourselves as like buddies on a road trip, you
Abbott
know?
and Costello.
And I don't like that. I don't like that one because we all know Costello was smarter, so we'd have to arm wrestle to see who was who. But
Really?
yeah, really.
I think someone could just
I
pick up
see.
our latest book, Exodus Reality, and see who's the most cleverest out of all of us.
Oh, well, just
They
remember.
could see that my theory is full of fact and it's solid, while yours is very holy, very biblically
But
based.
John's no
Yawn.
Hemingway. You're no
And-
Hemingway.
I just write in a different style that makes
Oh.
sense. I do not
That makes
sensationalize and I
sense.
do not
Oh,
flower.
Soraya, I have to share this with you. In our book, The Exodus Reality, we had two different sections of the book, and it was divided chapter after chapter. They alternate our two different theories on Moses, and it's called, his is Amenhotep, son of Hapu, and mine is Senenmut. And so we have at the beginning of each chapter the Senenmut thread or the Hapu thread,
Right.
and as you're going through the book, and we were signing a book for somebody that we knew. And it was actually David Weatherly, and he had been speaking on tulpas and thought forms and so on. And I wrote in the flyleaf of the book, I said, you will find that you know, John's theory is much like a tulpa or a thought form. It's transitory. It's just an image that he's made up in his own mind, and he's given it substance. And but you'll, you know, hopefully enjoy the book anyway. And then John writes, he writes to him. He says, Scotty's theory on Senenmut is outstanding. Phenomenal research. You'll find it all beginning on page 286. And you flip to 286. Well, the book only has 285 pages. And so on the blank page, he writes 286 at the bottom and Senenmut's theory at the top.
That
So
about sums you up, really, doesn't it?
that's he has great fun. I tell him, look, I read books. You just dig in the sandbox. So what do you know? But everything John and I do, we like to look at it and say, why can't you enjoy academic research? Why can't you have differing theories and still have fun with it?
Right.
There are times where we have two distinct theories on that particular book, and we disagreed with each other, but there were times where and John, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and all joking aside, I think there were times where we both went, that's pretty intriguing. Your theory. I got to think about that one. You know, and we both did that with each other's theories for a bit. But you know,
I don't think I ever did it with yours.
Oh, he's lying now. He's lying. And but it was, you know, a passing fancy, as I was going to say. So, oh, I like to call John my little biblical minimalist, who likes to go totally away from any efficacy to biblical history at all. And so anyway, that's what John and I are, and what we try to do with what we do. We want to do that with every project we work on. It's like we're on a trip, we're on an adventure. Come with us. Enjoy this. It's history is fun. Alternative theory is fun. It's all an adventure. And come along and enjoy the ride with us, whether it's the Paradigm Symposium or Intrepid Radio or our different books that we write and the different books we have out there right now that are in the works. And so John and I like to, I think if I'm getting anywhere near your original question, we like to approach things academically and in a common sense fashion, without getting too far out there. And if we're far out there, we try to establish why we're far out there. And at the same time, entertain the fact that we don't know everything. And that no matter what theory we put forward, the next shovel in the ground might change history. and overturn everything we've studied. And so that's really our approach to everything.
Very well
Well,
said.
I think most groundbreaking theories were originally alternative theories at one point.
Oh, absolutely. Oxygen? What? We breathe a chemical? We breathe a, no. And you see that, 8,000 years ago, they had no way to quantify oxygen. The people just breathed. And it wasn't until somebody went, there's something there. I'm breathing in something. What is that? And that was an odd theory back then. He probably got stoned or ousted from his village as a witch.
Well,
So,
we could see in more modern times the guy who came up with tectonic plate theory was blackballed.
right.
So, I did have a question for John. When you guys were on the Graylian report, you mentioned you didn't agree with Robert Schoch's dating of the Sphinx, and I was wondering why.
I wondered if someone would pick that one up. I've been to the Sphinx more times than I've had hot dinners. I've walked around her. She is an amazing piece of artistic representation. Is she older than the pyramids? Possibly. Is she older than 10,000 years? No. Why? There's something fundamentally missing from around the Sphinx, and that is archaeological evidence. The Sphinx herself cannot be guaranteed as an archaeological artifact that we can use to, at this present moment, given our technological constraints, date. Robert's theory, as much as I give it credit, and I've spoken with Robert at length at the last Paradigm Symposium about this, I can't see where the erosion has taken place through the effects of water erosion. And so I just don't see it. And I may be missing something, as Scotty quite says, we can't be right all the time. But I just don't see it with his theory on the Sphinx. Towards the back of the Sphinx, you've got these tombs, and then you've got the plateau as it goes towards the pyramids. You've got the processional way and so forth. I think part of Robert's theory is that the water is shed off of the Giza plateau and down into the Sphinx, and he's using those cut grooves on the back of the quarry face, because it's a quarry. One has to remember this now. The Sphinx area is a quarry. The Sphinx itself was left because of the fracture, the stratification of that particular part of the stone would have been useless to use. So they kept it and retained it, and then it was carved into whatever it was before. That I have no problems with, whether it was a Sphinx before or whether it was a dog-like creature or a lion, and it's changed over the eons by various successive pharaohs. That I've got no problems with. Again, similarity here. I don't have a problem with predating the temple, the Sphinx temple. That does actually raise more questions than the Sphinx itself, and it's
Which
something
is
that
pretty
a lot of
amazing
people,
place.
yeah, a lot of people don't pick up on this, and I always wonder why they don't. If you go to the Sphinx, to get to the Sphinx itself, to stand above it and look at it, you have to walk through the Sphinx temple, the Valley Temple. And it's one of those architectural delights in Egypt that if you don't look, you're going to miss it, and you're going to miss something that really, really, really does blow your mind.
And it's actually, I was just going to say, you walk through that, and people might just walk through it. It's awfully plain to the naked eye, and you just it's another stone structure without a roof. And you're walking.
And most people, their emphasis there is that they need to get to the Sphinx, so they just rush through it.
Right.
And so they don't look at the floor, they don't look at the walls, they don't look at the pillars, they don't look at the stone itself, they don't look at the architecture, they don't look at the detail that has been preserved for thousands of years. They just really, all they want to do is get to the Sphinx, take a picture, hold the Sphinx and put their hands and take a picture, and then come back down and get into the coach, air conditioning, and get to the Egyptian Museum before it closes. And that's what they want to do. And what they miss in that is one of the most splendid, architecturally perfect temples in Egypt, because it represents something that hasn't been mimicked in Egypt. And let me clarify that. And that is the way in which the stones have been cut and placed within each other. You've got blocks that literally bend round corners. You've got blocks that are not uniformly square or rectangular, but are kind of diagonal, hexagonal, circular, rounded edges. And yet they fit together perfectly. And it reminds me of the Mayan constructions.
Does. You know what that reminded me of was that little temple with with alabaster floors, by the way, which it doesn't look like anything special till you really take a look at it and say, wait a minute, I'm walking on alabaster. And but the stones are fitted together. It reminded me a bit of Punka Puntu. You know what I'm talking about.
Punka Punku.
Punka Punku. Yeah, that one.
Yes.
Which one?
Punta Punku, I think it is.
I think it's Punka Punka. No, maybe it is Punka Punku.
I think it's Punka Puntu. Punka Punku.
Peter Pepper picked a pepper.
That place in Central America.
Utterly destroyed. It's South America, I think, and it was utterly destroyed.
Punta. I think
it's Puma Punk. Oh man.
Puma Punk.
I know what it is, and now I can't remember.
Shall I continue with the Sphinx temple while you two try and figure out how to say it?
You know, Puma Punku. It's like Puma Punku. Puma Punku. All right. So anyway, the stones are fitted together a lot like what you might see at Puma Punku. And that was what I took away when I walked in there. And it was different than anything I'd seen in Egypt.
And it is. And, you know, there is, if you go to Abydos, which is just outside Luxor, a little bit north, there's the wonderful temple built by Seti I. But there's also now recently, only this year, the excavations at Abydos have revealed these absolutely amazing and glorious Old Kingdom tombs, which is shedding more and more light on the old dynasties than we've ever had before, which is absolutely amazing work there by the teams. Hats off to them. But one of the structures which is behind Seti's temple is the Osirian, which plays quite a significant role today, again, within the alternative community, the New Age boys. The New Age spiritualists turn up there in their coach loads, dressed in their white robes and with their little beads and their little tambourines and little bells, and do their meditations and so forth there because they can feel the energy or something. Whatever. But the Osirian is an exact replica of the Sphinx temple, or is the Sphinx temple an exact replica of the Osirian at Abydos? No one has yet within the academic community, the Egyptological community, actually stated which one came first, because no one's really looked at this. And this is a subject that I would love to, when I've got some spare time, to actually conduct myself and do a little paper on, because it does warrant further investigation. The use of granite blocks, which must weigh in excess of 100 ton, at least in excess of 100 ton each, have been placed in such a fashion and dressed in such a fashion that it wasn't replicated only at these two sites. And it is a most glorious, if you ever get the chance, do take time before you jump up and see the Sphinx in all her glory. spend at least half an hour or an hour or 2 hours looking at the Sphinx temple, because you're gonna see things that you will not see again in Egypt until you get to Abydos. But Abydos, you won't see it all because it's flooded. The
I'm looking
inundation,
at pictures of it right now, and it is completely flooded.
it's permanently flooded. And that one suggestion is that it was always permanently flooded, because it's part and parcel of the Osirian. Osiris was parts of his body, when he was split apart by Set, was cast into the River Nile and so forth, and the rejuvenation of the Nile herself, the coming of the waters, the coming of the new year, the coming of the harvest, the rising of the Sirius star, blah 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 blah, is all personified within that particular temple complex, the Osirian. And at the end of the Osirian is there's two tunnels that rise up at a slight gradient, but on them have got the most immaculate, beautifully painted hieroglyphics, depictions from the Book of the Dead or the Book of Tuat. But what is most spectacular about these paintings is that they are mirrored. So you have one, say, the first division above you, on you're facing it, and then beneath it, but mirrored, is the first division, but upside down. And it's wonderfully done. It is beautifully done. And the Osirian, if you can get there, is a beautiful place to go to.
Wow. All right. You're on you're on WVBR FM Ithaca. We are almost done, but I did have another question for you. And wow, it'd be really great if I could remember what it was. Oh, I know what it was. Someone had brought this. Yes. Someone had brought this up, and I figure you're as good a person as any to ask. Why does no one focus on the other two pyramids on the Giza Plateau?
I like that question. You know why?
Why?
Because it wasn't built by aliens.
I knew that the answer was right there. Or levitation. Yeah. The ones the ones that didn't use levitation to move the stones are unimportant.
You go into those pyramids, and they are what they are. Pyramids with burial chambers. If you look at, and I cannot pronounce her name for the living God of me,
Nefertiti?
No. There's a queen, an old dynasty queen. There is actually a fourth pyramid on the Giza Plateau. But it's so
Is that the one we crawled down inside? The Queen's Pyramid?
No. This is one way over on the other side of the Sphinx Temple. But the other three pyramids are exactly that. They're burial chambers. You can see it. You go in there. You've got the text. You've got the sarcophagi. You've got the remnants. It oozes Egypt. It oozes pharaonic. Get inside the Great Pyramid, and there's something about her that isn't quite right.
It's actually, again, for lack of a better word, very plain.
Yes.
With its magnificent engineering, it's still awfully plain. I remember John and I, we crawled up inside there, and you're going up this shaft at about a 45-degree angle, and you're bent over. It's only about 4 feet tall, for about the length of maybe a football field. And you finally get to the top of that, and you go, oh my God, I can stand up again. And you're inside the Grand Gallery, which has 70 to 100-foot ceilings, and it's all sloped because of the shape of the pyramid, but it's all this stonework above your head. And you're in this grand open gallery. And they've built the staircase to go to the top of that, where the doorway is to the king's chamber. There was no stairway there originally, so you would stand there at the bottom of that grand gallery and look all the way up, and there's a doorway up on the far wall. And again, so you go up the stairway, and you crouch again another 4-foot passageway for about 15 feet and emerge into this black granite chamber, which is the king's chamber. And I remember being in there with John when we're in the Grand Gallery, and you're looking at the stonework around you. And I said, it's very clear to me that this was built by guys. This is a bunch of guys that put this together. It's got all the earmarks of having been constructed by people.
Right.
And this is when we were, toying with all the people asking us questions about aliens and levitation and so on. But it's a magnificent plain structure. There's very few inscriptions there. And it was very.
Are there any inscriptions?
Sorry?
Are there any inscriptions?
There's none inside the Great Pyramid.
None.
And none
Okay.
on the out. And one has to remember, what we see today is not what our ancient ancestors were looking upon. All the casing stones have been removed.
Right, right.
And that was only recent, really, within modern history type of thing. So it is what it is. It's a pyramid. It's a structure built by man, for the burial of a god, the pharaoh. I don't believe, though, that he was actually interned in there. I believe that something was awry there, and that never took place. But it was definitely built by man. I'm sorry to say, the stones were not levitated or kind of placed in using sound waves or toning or anything of that nature. It is what it is. And
So how do you think they moved the stones? The really big ones.
by sheer manpower. You've got to remember, I work at Silsila, and there we've got blocks up. I mean, we've got two wonderful obelisks at Silsila, still in situ, and they've got to be in excess of 100 ton, excess of. And you can see the ramp. The ramp is still there today. You can see where it's being chiseled out of the bedrock.
Oh, all around the base of the pyramid,
yeah.
you've got the quarries are right there. You can see the quarry marks where they drag the
People
stone
don't
out.
realize this. People just don't look at this. They would rather listen to some guru alternative theorist who wants to sell his book for a couple of bucks and tell you that ancient aliens or some ancient technology that was used by the ancients was used to build it, because we cannot figure out for ourselves how or why or how they were motivated to build it, because we don't see anything of that nature being built today.
You know,
I disagree.
I liken this to as long as we're talking about that topic. Look at the Abydos lintel, the famous Abydos lintel that has, of course, the helicopter and the tank and the airplane and things like that in it. And people have a lot of ado about this, yet that's been very explained and not explained away. There's no conspiracy theory there. I gave an explanation to somebody for what this was, and I showed images, and it was online. We were discussing this, and there were still people who came back and said, well, I think you're part of some kind of cover-up. You're covering up the both. And really what all it was, I'm sorry, John, hang on to your thought there. All the Abydos lintel is, it's a product of what they called erasure. Erasure mixed with erosion. And erasure was simply when a temple or a monument existed, and the succeeding pharaoh or a succeeding pharaoh down the line claimed that as his own, and they would actually scrape off the old inscription and inscribe his own on top, or plaster over it and inscribe something. This was erasure. And you could see, by the way, with Ramses II, Ramses the Great, just something John pointed out to me my first time in Egypt was, he said, look how deep Ramses inscriptions are. Some of those are like 4 inches deep. You could stick your fingers deep into them. And that was because he was trying to prevent future erasure. But this is what the Abydos airplane and helicopter and all that is. It's a combination. When you take the 3 different stratas of inscription that are on there, and you can see them all, and they've had ultra red photography done of it. You can see the layers, and they're actually different inscriptions that the product of erasure mixed with natural erosion have made 3 different symbols look like a helicopter, or and an airplane. And, oh, why? But the conspiracy is, well, they all appear on one lintel, so there's something to that. And all this erasure nonsense is just a cover-up, is what people say. No, it's right there, folks. And I think this is what people do with the pyramids, do with a lot of these things, is they forget, number one, human ingenuity. Number two, the Giza Plateau is covered with an old village that was there. There were 20. John, didn't they say that there were upwards of 20,000 people living in this village right at Giza?
And what you've got to remember is that the Giza Plateau wasn't a plateau. Sorry to burst a bubble there, guys. It wasn't a plateau until they finished the pyramids.
Right.
Then it became a plateau, because before that, it was a mountain. And as they quarried the stone from around the areas where they wanted to build the pyramids, they inadvertently created a plateau.
And aren't the first 6 or 7 layers of block on the Great Pyramid?
Natural stratification.
It's carved out of the mountain. It's made to look like stacked block when it's really one big stone. It's the mountain.
Interesting.
So,
all right.
It's interesting when you're there and you're looking at it. And
I'm sure.
But,
all right, well,
but don't forget, and I just let me just say this quickly. Egypt still has mystery, and it still retains that. Don't forget that. Even though you've got guys out there that are purporting alien myths and so forth, and there's guys that are saying, well, no, it's this and that, and then there's others and so forth. There is still hidden treasure there. There is still mystery to be found. You just got to look for it and open your eyes.
All right. I thank both of you for spending some time with us. And one more time, where can people go to find out more about the Paradigm Symposium, which happens in 2 weeks?
You can go to ParadigmSymposium.com. And if you can't spell either of those words, go to INTREPIDMag.com and click on the Paradigm Symposium link.
All right. Thank you guys Thank you guys so much. We're going to take you out with some Psyche Corporation.